Abscisic acid, a plant hormone that generally acts to inhibit growth, promote dormancy, and help the plant tolerate stressful conditions. Abscission, and plant dropping leaves, flowers, roots, or stems at the end of growing season as the result of formation of two-layered zone of specialized cells, the abscission zone, and the action of hormone ethylene. Absorption, the movement of water and dissolved substances into a cell, tissue, or organism. Absorption spectrum, the range of a pigment ability to absorb various wavelengths of light. Acetyl coenzyme A, the entry compound for the Krebs cycle in cellular respiration, formed from a fragment of pyruvate attached to a coenzyme. Acoelomate, a solid-bodied animal lacking a cavity between the gut and outer body wall. Activation energy, the energy that must be possessed by atoms or molecules in order to react. Active site, the specific portion of an enzyme that attaches to the substrate by means of weak chemical bonds. Active transport, the movement of substance across a biological membrane against its concentration or electrochemical gradient with the help of energy input and specific transport proteins. Adenosine diphosphate (ADP), a nucleotide consisting of adenine ribose and two phosphate groups formed by the removal of one phosphate from an ATP molecule. Adenosine monophosphate (AMP), a nucleotide consisting of adenine ribose and one phosphate group can be formed by the removal of two phosphates from an ATP molecule. In its cyclic form, functions as a second messenger for a number of vertebrate hormones and neurotransmitters. Adenosine triphosphate (ATP), an adenine-containing nucleoside triphosphate that releases free energy when its phosphate bonds are hydrolyzed. This energy is used to drive androgenic reaction in cells. Allergic reaction, an inflammatory response triggered by a weak antigen and allergen to which most individuals do not react involves the release of large amount of histamine from mast cells. Alternation of generations, a life cycle in which there is both a multicellular diploid form, the sporophyte, and multicellular haploid form, the gametophyte, characteristics of plants. Amino group, a functional group that consists of a nitrogen atom bonded to two hydrogen atoms, can act as base in solution, accepting a hydrogen ion and acquiring a charge of plus 1. Aerobic, lacking oxygen, referring to an organism, environment, or cellular process that lacks oxygen and may be poisoned. This is anaerobic process. Anthocyanin, natural water-soluble pigment, a blue, purple, or red, which are dissolved in the cell sap vacuole of plant cells. Antibiotic, a chemical that kills bacteria or inhibits their growth. Antibody, an antigen binding immunoglobulin produced by beta cells that functions as the effector in an immune response. Antigen, a foreign macromolecule that does not belong to the host organism and that elicits an immune response. Aorta, The major artery and blood circulating system, the aorta sends blood to the other body tissues. Apical dominance. Concentration of growth at the tip of a plant shoot where a terminal bud partially inhibits axillary bud growth. Apical meristem. Embryonic plant tissue in the tips of root and in the buds of shoots that supply cells for the plant to grow in length. Apoplast. In plants, the non-living continuum formed by the extracellular pathway provided by continuous matrix of cell walls. Apoptosis. Programmed cell death brought about by signals that trigger the activation of a cascade of suicide proteins in the cell destined to die. Assimilation. The energy requiring process by which plant cells convert nitrate ions taken up by the roots of plants into ammonium ions, which can then be used in the synthesis of amino acid and other nitrogenous compounds. Atrioventricular valve, a valve in the heart between each atrium and ventricle that prevents a backflow of blood when the ventricle contracts. Autoimmune disease, an immunological disorder in which the immune system turns against itself. B cells, a type of lymphocyte that develops in the bone marrow and later produces antibodies which mediate humoral immunity. Bark, all tissues external to vascular cambium in a plant growing in thickness consisting of phloem, phloderm, carp cambium, and carp. Biochemical pathway, an ordered series of chemical reactions in a living cell in which each step is catalyzed by a specific enzyme. Different biochemical pathways serve different functions in the life of the cell. Bioenergetics, the study of how organisms manage their energy resources. Biosynthesis, formation by living organisms of organic compounds from elements or simple compounds. Blood pressure, the hydrostatic force that blood exerts against a wall of vessel. Bond energy, the quantity of energy that must be absorbed to break a particular kind of chemical bond equal to quantity of energy the bond releases when it forms. But in plants, an embryonic shoot, including rudimentary leaves, often protected by special bud scales. In animals, an asexually produced outgrowth that develops into a new individual. Bulb, a modified bud with thickened leaves adapted for underground food storage. C4 pathway, the setup reaction by which some plants initially fix carbon in the 4 carbon compound oxaloacetic acid. The carbon dioxide is later released in the interior of the leaf and enters the Calvin cycle. C4 plant, a plant that repasses the Calvin cycle with reaction that incorporate carbon dioxide into 4 carbon compounds, the end product of which supplies carbon dioxide for the Calvin cycle. Callus, in plants, undifferentiated tissue, a term used in tissue culture, grafting, and wound healing. Calvin cycle. The second of the two major stages in photosynthesis following the light reactions involving atmospheric carbon dioxide fixation and reduction of the fixed carbon into carbohydrate. Carcinogen, a chemical agent that causes cancer. Cardiac muscle, a type of muscle that forms the contractile wall of the heart. Its cells are joined by intercalated discs that relay each heartbeat. Catalyst, a substance that lowers the activation energy of a chemical reaction by forming a temporary association with the reacting molecule as a result. The rate of the reaction is accelerated. Enzymes are catalysts. Cell cycle, an ordered sequence of events in the life of a dividing eukaryotic cell composed of MGS and G phases. Cell-mediated immunity, the type of immunity that functions and defends against fungi, protists, bacteria, and viruses inside host cells, and against tissue transplants with highly specialized cells that circulate in the blood and lymphoid tissues. Cell flat, a double membrane across the midline of a dividing plant cell between which the new cell wall forms during cytokinesis. Centromere, the centralized region joining two sister chromatids. Centrosome, material present in the cytoplasm of all eukaryotic cells and important during cell division, also called microtubule organizing center. Chitin, a structural polysaccharide of an amino sugar found in many fungi and in the exoskeleton of all arthropods. Cholesterol, a steroid that forms an essential component of animal cell membranes and acts as precursor molecule for the synthesis of other biologically important steroids. Coenzyme, an organic molecule serving as cofactor. Most vitamins function as coenzyme and important metabolic reactions. Cofactor, any non-protein molecule or ion that is required for the proper functioning of an enzyme. Cofactor can be permanently bound to the active site or may bind loosely with substrate during catalysis. Cohesion, the binding together of like molecules often by hydrogen bonds. Cohesion species concept, the idea that specific evolutionary adaptation and discrete complexes of genes define species. Cork, a secondary tissue that is a major constituent of bark and woody and some herbaceous plants, made up of plant cells, dead at maturity, restricts gas and water exchange, and protects the vascular tissues for injury. Cork cambium, a cylinder of meristematic tissue in plants that produces cork cells to replace the epidermis during secondary growth. Cytokines, in the vertebrate immune system, proteins factors secreted by macrophages and helper cells as regulators of neighboring cells. Cytosol, the semi-fluid portion of the cytoplasm, the neutral plant, a plant whose flowering is not affected by photoperiod. Dehydration reaction, a chemical reaction in which two molecules covalently bond to one another with the removal of a water molecule. Diastole, the stage of heart cycle in which the heart muscle is relaxed, allowing the chambers to fill with blood. Diastolic pressure, the pressure in an artery during the ventricular relaxation phase of the heart cycle. Dioecious, referring to a plant species that has staminate and carpellate flowers on separate plants. Dispersion, the distribution of individuals within geographical population boundaries. Double fertilization, a mechanism of fertilization in angiosperms in which two sperm cells unite with two cells in embryo sac to form zygote and endosperm. Double helix, the form of native DNA referring to its two adjacent polynucleotide strands wound into a spiral shape. Electromagnetic spectrum, the entire spectrum of radiation ranges in wavelength from less than a nanometer to more than a kilometer. Electron acceptor, substrate that accept or receive electrons, and an oxidation reduction reaction becoming reduced in the process. Electron carrier, a molecule that conveys electrons, one of several membrane proteins and electron transport chains and cells. Electron carriers shuttle electrons during the redox reaction that release energy used to make ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Electron transport chain. A sequence of electron carrier molecule membrane protein that shuttle electron during the redox reaction that release energy used to make ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Endergonic reaction, a non-spontaneous chemical reaction in which free energy is absorbed from the surroundings. Energy of activation, the amount of energy that reactants must absorb before a chemical reaction will start. Exergonic reaction, spontaneous chemical reaction in which there is a net release of free energy. Exocrine glands, glands such as sweat glands and digestive glands that secrete their products into ducts that empty onto surfaces such as skin or into cavities such as the interior of the stomach. Exocytosis, the cellular secretion of macromolecules by fusion of vesicles with plasma membrane, facilitated diffusion. The spontaneous passage of molecules and ions bound to specific carrier proteins across a biological membrane down their concentration gradients. Fatty acids, a long carbon chain carboxylic acid, fatty acid vary in length and in the number and location of double bonds. Three fatty acids linked to a glycerol molecule form fat. Fibrin, the activated form of the blood clotting protein fibrinogen, which aggregates into threads that form the fabric of the clot. Filtration, the first stage of kidney function. Blood plasma is forced under pressure out of the glomerular capillaries into Bowman's capsule through which it enters the renal tubule. Fossil, the remains of an organism are direct evidence of its presence, such as tracks may be an unaltered hard part, tooth or bone, a mold in a rock, vitrification, wood or bone, unaltered or partially altered, soft parts, a frozen mammoth, as example. Gastric, pertaining to the stomach. Gastrin, a digestive hormone secreted by the stomach that stimulates the secretion of gastric juice. Gastrovascular cavity, a central digestive compartment, usually with a single opening that functions as both mouth and anus. Glucagon, a peptide hormone secreted by pancreatic endocrine cells that raises blood glucose levels. An antagonistic hormone to insulin. Glycerol, a three-carbon molecule with three hydroxyl group attached. A glycerol molecule. Gut cells, a specialized epidermal plant cell that forms the boundaries of stomata. Helper T cells, a type of T cell that is required by some B cells to help them make antibodies or that help other T cells respond to antigens or secrete lymphokines or interleukins. Histamine, a substance released by injured cells that cause blood vessels to dilate during an inflammatory response. Histone, a small protein with a high proportion of positively charged amino acid that bind to the negatively charged DNA and plays a key role and its chromatin structure. Humoral immunity. The type of immunity that fights bacteria and viruses in body fluids with antibodies. Inflammation. A body strategy initiated by the release of chemical following injury or infection, which brings additional blood with its protective cells to the injured area. Long day plants. Plants that flower when the length of daylight exceeds some critical period. Meristems and plant cluster of cells that retain their ability to divide, thereby producing new cells. One of the four basic tissues in plants. Microfilaments. Thin protein fibers that are responsible for maintenance of cell shape, muscle contraction, and cyclosis. Microtubules. Thin hollow tubes and cells built from repeating protein units of tubulin. Microtubules are components of cilia, flagella, and the cytoskeleton. Parathyroid hormone. When blood calcium levels are low, parathyroid hormone is secreted, causing calcium to be released from bone. Pelagic zone. The open ocean divided into three layers. Epipelagic, mesopelagic, aphotic, or bathypelagic, always dark zone. Placenta. In mammals, exclusive of marsupials and monotreme, the structure through which nutrients and wastes are exchanged between the mother and embryo fetus develops from both embryonic and uterine tissues. Plasmid, a small circle of DNA in bacteria, in addition to its own chromosome components of seed coats and nuts. Sclerenchyma, component of the ground tissue system of plants that are thick-walled cells of various shapes and sizes, providing support or protection. They continue to function after the cell dies. Short day plants. Plants that flower in late summer or fall when the length of daylight becomes shorter than some critical period. Thigmotropism. Changes in plant growth stimulated by contact with another object, vines, climbing on cement walls. Transformation. A genetic transfer mechanism that produces new DNA in bacteria when DNA from a new organism is combined with the DNA of the host cell. Translation: the cell process that converts a sequence of nucleotides in messenger RNA into a sequence of amino acids. Vernalization: the promotion of flowering or germination after a plant is exposed to low temperatures. Viviparous, referring to an animal whose offspring are born rather than hatched through an egg.